because you're like, this is not my beautiful house. This is not my. It's like, how did I get here? The typical marketing lapse.
Hello and welcome to episode 81 of Rockstar CMO FM. The M is for marketing and the F is for, well, you decide. As you're probably wondering, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'm your host, Ian Truscott, and this weekly podcast is my excuse to chat with marketing friends, old and new, that I've met through my career as a marketing leader, consultant, and trusted advisor, and share with you some marketing street knowledge we've picked up along the way that could bring out the Rockstar CMO in you. Come say hello. We are Rockstar CMO on Twitter and LinkedIn. This episode is recorded on Friday, the 24th of September. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've had a good week and you're well, safe, and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. This week, inspired by last week's interview with Christina Del Villar, Jeff Clark and I discuss marketing technology. I have a fascinating conversation with David Budnitsky on ethics in marketing, and we kick off the weekend with Robert Rose in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar. Right, let's get started, shall we? On to our first segment. I'm again joined by my chum, Jeff Clark, Rockstar CMO advisor and former research director at Serious Decisions and Forrester, who's inspired by last week's chat with Christina Del Villar. Hello, Jeff. Welcome back to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you this week, my friend?
Very good. Thank you for having me back.
Hey, always. You know, I know that when you're not here, you're off saving the world, but some weeks
the world can wait.
The world can wait. We need the saving.
Yep.
And in our little bit of, and how has your week been?
Week has been very busy. It's been there's a ton going on, and a lot of it is more on the work client side than the saving the planet side. So we've got to get back to that planet at some point.
Yeah, well, it's getting to that time of year and it's busy again after the summer. But when we were prepping for this or having a chat, I don't know if we can call it prep or whether it's just a chat before I press record. We were talking about the fact that last week I was talking to Christina Del Villar in our final part of the 4-part series I did with her and her book. And we were talking about her GRIT marketing methodology. And the GRIT stands for, well, the GRIT is GRIT. And the T in GRIT that we did last week, which caught your eye or ear, was the fact we talked about tech and tools. Now, I know, Jeff, from working with you, that's an interest of yours, back from when you were at Serious Decisions Forrester. What say you, my friend?
What say me? Well, as I listened to her talk, I mean, it brought back either memories, nightmares. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, it brought back just, working with clients on the rationalization of their technology within marketing. Yeah. Sometimes sales and marketing together, but it reminded me, particularly a lot of discussions she was talking about, reminded me of, probably a decade or so ago when corporate IT organizations were faced with this portfolio management issue where it's like, okay, we've, from the 80s, 90s on, we bought a lot of stuff. We bought new ERP systems. We bought CRM systems. We set up a website, marketing tools, And now people are asking us to buy more. Yeah. And it's costing us too much maintaining what we've got and rationalizing, integrating all those various issues. And so we've got to do a better job at portfolio management and make sure that every investment going forward's got some business purpose. It's tied to a strategy. It's got some sort of business case behind it, et cetera. And what we were running into at Forrester Serious Decisions, particularly when I started there, which was around 2016, was that marketers were running into that exact same dilemma. It's like people are starting to ask, okay, we've spent a lot of money on, whatever, Eloqua, Marketo, Pardot. We spent a lot of money on, Salesforce, Dynamics, whatever. And now you're asking me, and we built a website and we did this, and now you're asking me for tools to help do targeting, or now you're asking me for tools. And so when's it going to stop? And how do I justify this additional spend? And so, what we developed, and this was part of it, because I joined the marketing operations strategy group, and so a lot of it was, marketing ops owns this problem, and it's either marketing ops or it's something like marketing ops, where it's part of the digital team, or there's somebody actually who's got a marketing technology director title or something like that. And the CMO says, okay, you got to go figure out what our strategy is here, build a roadmap, make sure everything we're using is makes sense for what we're doing today. And so we've kind of developed a lot of these concepts around, how do you assess what you currently got, since it's kind of a two-part problem. One is I got to figure out what I got and whether it's still driving value, and then I got to figure out if somebody is going to request something new, how do they build a case for it? How do I help them build a case for it? And so you can kind of conduct those two different things as part of one process, but they sometimes have two different drivers. One is kind of more of a budgetary element. It's like, okay, we're already spending, 8% of our marketing budget on tools. And that seems high. So, run benchmarks, figure out, do an assessment where you say, let's, inventory all the tools, who owns it, how much do we spend on it, how much might have been in capital expense, operational expense, support costs, is it being used? So is there kind of a measure, can we quantify the utilization, or is it just we need to get a sense of, yes, I'm using the tool, no, I'm not using the tool. Does it still provide value, and does it have issues that we need to address to improve utilization? Oftentimes, the things like, tools aren't integrated properly, or they're creating data problems. Either they're creating bad data, or they're ingesting bad data. And so those are things that are very typical for stopping the adoption of something. Somebody buys something. Well, of course, the other thing is that the team goes away. It's like you buy a tool. And it was amazing when we do assessments, how often it was like, well, we had this really great, market resource management tool, and the team was really using it, and then the team went away, and so now I own it, and so nobody's using it anymore, and it has value, but so that's something that has particularly budgetary implications, and that you want to make sure that everything in your stack is being properly used, and if it's not, you address what the issue is. And the issue might be a training issue, or it might be a functional issue. And so if you can solve for those, then maybe it's worth keeping it. But if you can't, then you ditch it, or you replace it, whatever.
I remember, I know you can't quote it, but I remember reading, I can talk about it, I guess. I remember reading a case study that you guys did when you were back at Forrester, and you saved somebody a ton of money doing that, didn't you? And that was able to be reinvested back into the actual tools they really needed, right?
That I can touch on that without mentioning the names and stuff like that. But there was a guy who had worked for a CMO at least another company where they did this similar process. And so the one that we wrote up was where, he comes in and he says that, okay, so the big driver is we need to be able to start, it was a small, fast growing company, and we need to be able to start driving demand and measuring it. And they just didn't have the capability to do that. So basically he said, okay, we're going to look at everything, and they happen to be on Salesforce. So, so we're going to look at everything that ties to Salesforce and or doesn't, and ditch what we're not using, and use that money to invest in new tools and or in programs. And what they ended up, I can't remember, I think in terms of like numbers of tools, I think they cut it in half, but they lowered the budget, and then they returned most of that budget to the CMO
Wow.
programs. So it's
and that was led.
Oh, go ahead.
That was led by marketing operations, by somebody coming in running marketing operations, right? Okay, because that was also what I was going to ask you about, where this sort of responsibility sits for taking a look at this, and I think that's sometimes a devalued role in a marketing team, isn't it? Marketing operations.
Absolutely. I mean, it is. It should be the right hand person for the CMO, because absolutely. It's charge of tech process, data. It's kind of everything that makes on the back end that makes marketing run, and can be more of a impartial, participant, as opposed to like somebody who's like, I got to keep my, I own the website, I got to keep all my tools that run the website, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's and sometimes the sort of the function of the marketing operations like functions may exist in other teams, and it may be part of a revenue ops, like marketing and sales ops together, or it could be part of a digital marketing team. And as I said, sometimes we certainly ran into companies that had a marketing technology director who would have to coordinate with the digital team and the marketing ops leaders to do their work.
Yeah. And these days we talk about dark IT, don't we? The sort of tools that people are implementing on their credit cards or whatever, or bringing in with departmental budget, and IT don't know about them, and they run a bit of a mock. Is there a sense of the same sort of thing within marketing? Like these, I mean, I see it all the time. People they see this shiny bauble and they go grab it, and they have made no sort of thought about how it fits into the compliance or governance or data security or any of that stuff of your other marketing tools.
I mean, typically that's a very serious problem, particularly in very distributed marketing organizations. And it's just, I mean, it's so many marketing tools. It's like when you guys were talking about, the MarTech advisory, 8,000 tools. Well, the 8,000 tools got there because so many of them are priced at a price point that a director or below can put it on a company credit card. And it may work for them. And one of the things we found is that some companies that got good at managing this, they would say that okay, if the technology you're buying is going to affect corporate data and systems, so it's going to modify data that's critical to our CRM systems and our ERP systems, and so it's got to go through a rigorous review before we can purchase it. But if it's something that it's like a lot of web monitoring and testing tools and stuff like that are totally outside of that that realm, and so it's like we don't want to be overbearing and make sure that we're dotting every I and crossing every T on something that is not not going to have that kind of impact. But for the stuff that certainly is that takes budget, that takes time, that takes effort to manage, is you really should go through kind of a capability driven analysis, and this is almost as important for understanding what you got, but it's more important for where you are going forward, because one of the things that you can, as a marketing ops or whoever has this responsibility, they can do is they can try to build a framework where it says, okay, marketing has certain big initiatives, or the company has certain big initiatives, and so those could be improving customer experience, it could be targeting our digital marketing, it could be just driving better efficiency or improving revenue contribution, and we're going to use that as a lens to kind of talk to the people who own or key participants of those initiatives, and build out a set of capabilities that are required to get that work done. So, if you're talking about, we need to manage the customer life cycle. So how do we map a buyer journey? How do we align the journey with the customer life cycle? How do we onboard customers? How do we, so there's, without getting into a feature function thing, you're getting to a level of detail where you can say, okay, we need to be able to do this. And there's likely, as much as there's a technology aspect to that, there's also a people skill, a process aspect, and there's also a data aspect that and there was one client that I remember working with, it was like they were pushing to buy a bunch of, account-based marketing or ABM tools. And he was like, well, we don't have anybody to use them. So let's put that on the roadmap, but push that out a year so that when we hire the people who are going to use them, we make the right decisions and blah, blah, blah. So that kind of balancing act, particularly that kind of a balancing act, shows that somebody in marketing ops or whoever owns this, that they got a sort of business savvy nature to how they're looking at the problem. They're not just saying, okay, you want this tool, let's do the vendor review.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how we slap it in. It's trying to be a little bit more sophisticated.
I've got 2 instances of that right now, where I've got 2 different marketing groups that are talking about tools that they want, but they're talking about the tool. They're talking about the vendor. They're talking about the very specific tool that they want to bring in. And
they saw the demo.
Yeah. And I said, well, what do you want it for? What's the requirement? And the thing for them is they want the toy, right? And I want this, it's shiny. But what I've found in my career is that if you go ahead and get the shiny, somebody at some point is going to object, right? So unless you've done the requirement gathering and you can, it's a defendable decision, even if you do end up choosing the same vendor, whatever it is, you need to really have that little step back and have that sober moment, which is, why am I buying this? It's to do this because somebody at some point is going to ask you.
Right. And have a really good understanding of once implemented, how's this going to impact the organization?
Absolutely.
Because there's all the change management aspects of, okay, we've got to make sure it works. We've got to drive adoption. We got to make sure it integrates with whatever tools it needs to integrate, and then going forward, how are we going to monitor this? How are we going to prove that it actually did what was intended?
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, and I listened to a bit of Seth Godin's podcast today, and I finished one, and it flipped to an old one and started playing it, and he was talking about the phrase, the phrase, that you're being given free puppies, not free beer, and that they're going to require work. Well, he said it even differently, and he said that you're not getting a puppy, you're getting a full-grown dog, right? So think about the fact that what is this thing going to need in 3 to 6 months or a year's time? Who's going to look after it? And have you got house room, and who's going to do the walking? And I thought that was a really good analogy in that we often talk about free puppies and free beer, but we don't think we're not getting a puppy, we're getting a full grown dog. And I think it's the same with these tools. And like you say, the data flows that are going to happen. And you see this an awful lot with content, because each of these new little things that somebody can buy on their credit card is a new little content repository, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It's got its own lightweight, photo thing or email, save it here, blog posty thing there.
As we've had a lot of discussions on digital asset management, which is a subject we both know, and it's like, well, I've got my content marketing tool, it's got a damn. I've got my MRM tool, it's got a damn. I've got the corporate IT's got a asset management system. And we could buy this, and it comes with its own. And it's like, how are you going to rationalize how all that works together? And,
well, this is a conversation I had. This is exactly the same conversation I'm having about a sales enablement tool, a really good sales enablement tool. And I said, you do know the implication of this is that is a content management system, and therefore you're going to need to make a decision about what that is going to become your content management system. Well, no, it's like,
and you can oftentimes legitimately use. I mean, certainly some of those sales asset management systems, I mean, they do have the sort of the capabilities that can help you do the broader scope management. But this is.
But you've got to think about the flow of the data, but also the flow of the content.
Yeah, and the process flows. That's why I know one of the things you and Christina were talking about is kind of like the understanding the workflow within an organization. How are you going to support that? And that's why when you do this capability analysis, and we used to kind of build these charts of here's these capabilities we want to build. Okay, so what's our status, tech, process, tools, data, and what's the issue, and then how are we going to address that issue? Because once you kind of build that matrix, all of a sudden, it's the picture or the table, that says 1,000 words. Like people go, oh, okay, gosh, you got to solve this workflow issue before we know where we're going to put the content, or whatever issue that you're trying to get to, because
yeah.
just way too many organizations are just weighted down with all of these tools that, and particularly if they've been through any kind of M&A experience, because then it's we chose this marketing automation platform, we chose this web content manager, we chose this because this was the best of the breed, blah blah blah, but then it didn't work together. And so what we'd often do is we just go through, and I know this sounds, as we kind of paint this picture, it sounds kind of complex, but it's like what we would try to help people do is go through an interview process where you just kind of come up with a limit of 10 questions, but you just try to go through, what do you do? What do you need? Where are the gaps for today? And then if we tell you that, or you certainly know that one of your major objectives is to improve customer experience. So as you think about that, where's the gap for you? And then you get you not only get feedback that really helps open your eyes as to where the investment should be, but also you uncover the tools. Well, it's like, we did buy this thing, nobody's using it right now. Oh my God, and we're paying for it.
So you talked about where you start with that assessment and you look at the workflow and you try and map out the workflow. Where do you go after that with what does this sort of process or framework that you're talking about look like?
So usually what where you go is, once you kind of build out this capability map and you're showing where the issues are, is you try to summarize a list of potential investments, and the investments could literally be dollars and cents investments, or pounds, or euros, or it could be investments in time and energy, because you want to make sure that it's like something may not cost money because we're using internal resources, but it's going to take time. So let's make sure we account for that. And then you put that list of things on a grid where you see, here are short-term investments, we call it like the quick hits, short-term investments that have a quick payback versus long-term investments that have a really good payback, but it's there's expense up front. And then there's obviously areas that are in the middle. And then there's all the things that are like, here are the tools that we need to sunset because we just need to get them off the balance sheet. And so it's a process that takes some time and thought through it, but it's amazing how quickly the nuggets come out that make it clear where you should be investing versus where you shouldn't be investing.
No, that's splendid. And we're coming up to time, and I could talk about this more. I'm a as we both know, tech and tools type person on the marketing side. So I'm fascinated by this topic. And also it'd be good to explore, the sorts of organizations that can benefit from this, because obviously this is very much about sometimes it's about large marketing organizations, but I'm seeing it increasingly with mid-sized organizations are now getting into this. Like you said, there's 8,000, marketing technologies out there, according to Scott Brinker. And that a lot of companies are now picking these little tiny. So it's not just the big organizations that got this challenge anymore, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, mate. Well, and so hopefully will you join us again next week to discuss our next topic?
Absolutely.
Yes. I think we're going to talk about CRS, aren't we?
We're going to talk about corporate responsibility, I think sustainability programs.
We might have promised that we were going to talk about that last week, but we'll give it another go. And in the meantime, Jeff, when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where are they going to find you?
They can find me at Rockstar CMO Advisors and on LinkedIn.
That's splendid. And you're the Jeff Clark that's in where? Did you say? Because you always say, I'm the Jeff Clark that's in, and it's your geography.
Amherst, Massachusetts, west of Boston, over the hills. Yes. And
splendid. All right, mate. Yeah. Well,
we have to hit the tune.
The tune. What are we going to play out with today, Jeff?
One of my favorites from when I was a a young lad, the talking heads once in a lifetime, because you're like, this is not my beautiful house. This is not my, it's like, how did I get here? The typical marketing ops, nightmare. How did I get here?
That has got to be the anthem for marketing ops, and I will gladly play out with that. That's a classic tune. Thank you, Jeff, and I'll see you next week, mate.
Sounds good.
Cheers,
living in a shotgun shack, and you may find yourself in another part of the world, and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile, and you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
Thank you, Jeff. A topic we will no doubt return to. And who doesn't have those classic lyrics in their head as they review their marketing technology, or pretty much anything really? How did I get here? And that was, of course, Talking Heads from 1981 with Once in a Lifetime. And, of course, I'll include all of Jeff's links in the show notes. And if you have any thoughts on that discussion or have suggestions for what we should be discussing, get in touch. We are Rockstar CMO on Twitter and LinkedIn. On to this week's guest. Back in episode 75, I interviewed David Rudnitsky about his book, Unfair Marketing. We also discussed his journey founding his agency 3Q Digital in 2008 and his experience in senior marketing roles at several Silicon Valley internet companies in the early days of this industry. If you didn't catch it, it's well worth a listen. Aside from talking to us, David is a sought-after speaker for performance marketing industry events and has written for influential publications, including CNN Radio, Newsweek, Advertising Age, Search Engine Land, and Media Post. Inspired by an article in his Inside the Double Bubble newsletter, I've lured David back onto the podcast to discuss if we're all liars. Hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, David. Welcome back to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you?
Good, Ian. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
No, you're very welcome. And for the folks that didn't listen to our last episode, which is about a month or so ago, remind people who you are.
I am many things, but for purposes of this podcast, I am the founder of 3Q Digital, which is a digital advertising agency based in the United States. We have about 400 people, and we work with a lot of very successful companies, helping them with their performance marketing.
Right. And we had a fascinating conversation. I would urge people to go back to that, and I will include a link to it in the show notes. I think it was episode 63 or something like that, but I'll find out the exact number and add it in. I should have done my research. But anyway, as part of our conversation and getting to know you, I subscribed to your newsletter on LinkedIn, Inside the Double Bubble, which I think I linked to in the show notes last time. And if I didn't, I definitely will this time. Firstly, where did that name come from, Inside Double Bubble?
Well, so first of all, Double Bubble, I don't know if it translates over the Atlantic, but there used to be a gum, chewing gum called the Double Bubble. I think they advertised it as having more bubbles than your standard bubble gum. But my reference to it is, I've always thought that, I am an internet marketer and I live in Silicon Valley. So I have these two bubbles around me. I have the internet marketing bubble, where we're always on the cutting edge, whatever Facebook or Google is talking about. And then I have Silicon Valley, which is cutting edge. So I've always thought that my worldview is probably very skewed. I mean, I spend my day talking about, machine learning and self-driving cars. And I'm sure someone who is in, Liverpool is not as obsessed with topics as I am, because this is where I am in this double bubble. So that's where the term came from.
I love it. And I also was interested in the fact that you do this on LinkedIn, that you use their newsletter functionality, which I wasn't that familiar with before I subscribed to yours. Why did you choose to? I mean, I know it's a bit of off topic. We'll talk about the actual article that drew me to you in a second. But what I was interested in is, personally, there were so many choices about where we can put our newsletters these days. Why did you choose LinkedIn, and what's been your experience?
Well, I've always had this theory that if you're an early adopter of any sort of social media service, you tend to sort of get a lot of good tailwinds. And so, if in fact, more than 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago, LinkedIn introduced this concept called LinkedIn groups. I started a couple of groups around lead generation, and within a matter of months, I had 100,000 people in these groups. Now, unfortunately,
Wow.
LinkedIn has decided over time to just totally relegate these groups to backwater. Just they're totally pointless now. But at the time, I was like, this is great. I mean, I started this group and suddenly I have all this cachet and all these people that I can network to. So when LinkedIn came out with newsletters, I had the same thought. I was like, well, if this becomes a thing that LinkedIn's going to promote, if I can be one of the early people that's using it, my newsletter is going to get pretty good following. So it's been pretty successful.
Yeah.
3,000 followers. And the other nice thing about their system is that as soon as you write an article, it gets sent to someone's email as opposed to just being posted on LinkedIn, which can get, if you're not looking at LinkedIn at that moment, you're never going to see it. So I found it to be pretty useful.
Perfect storm, really, isn't it? I mean, I guess that's probably where Twitter might go with the review, I suppose, is that they'll do both. But I mean, because that's the problem with LinkedIn, isn't it? Once the stream goes away, they've missed it. However interested they might have been, particularly as LinkedIn doesn't support lists or anything like that. And as you say, groups is now just a backwater, is just dreadful. So that's incredible. And I actually remember when LinkedIn started, when you could first write stories on LinkedIn. And I was like, got one of the early passes to go do that. And you got so much traction. And then they introduced it to everybody and it just went off like a cliff. Just incredible. Yeah, I think being an early adopter, I think is good advice there. So anyway, back to the article that lured me, or inspired me to lure you back onto the show. You wrote an article in the most recent newsletter, which is, do marketers have a responsibility? Do marketers have a responsibility to tell the truth? Might help if I could read my notes. I loved it, and I was tweeting about it, and I posted it on LinkedIn as well. And what I like about this is the fact that you make us stop and think about how far we can go with marketing, and we'll talk about some of those points there. And you open the article. This is some work I'm not familiar with Harara and collective myths as being something that binds us. Tell us about that idea of collective myths.
Yeah, so this professor, Yuval Harari, wrote a book called Sapiens, and he talks about how society is built on myths. And so he doesn't mean myths in the sense of like something that is, some sort of dragon in the sky. He just means that we create stories that we all agree on and that allows society to operate. So, two lawyers agree that there's certain codes of conduct in the world of justice, and two people who follow the same religion agree that certain things are true about how the earth was created and whatnot. And so his point is basically society could not, even money is a myth, really. I mean, you have a dollar bill, and what is it? It's a piece of paper, but we all agree that it's worth something. So suddenly it becomes a truth. So his point is that that's how society grows. That's the difference between humans and animals, that we have these myths that we all collectively agree upon.
Yeah, and then I like the way. Well, I quite like the reason why you make this reference, because I've got the book and I'm a big Seth Godin fan, as we were just discussing before we came on. You then reference Seth Godin and the fact that all marketers are liars, which in the book he changed to storytellers, which I thought was good. And that was also built on a similar concept of myths, isn't it? That we tell ourselves that expensive wine is better and those kinds of things. What do you think of that? With the bringing in Seth into that myths conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because when he first wrote the book, he called it all marketers are liars. And he was just basically saying, like, as a marketer, you have this power to create these stories, and it doesn't matter really if it's true or not. You can create it. You can turn something into truth. And then he revised it and in a subsequent edition, and he said all marketers are storytellers.
Yeah.
And he specifically said, you know what, if you tell an outright lie, people aren't going to believe it. I mean, if you tell people that, you'll lose 50 pounds in a week taking this pill and it doesn't happen, you lose your credibility. But then this is where I thought the debate was interesting, because Harari has said, in talking about this whole post-truth world that we live in, he disagrees. He's like, no, you can create whatever myth you create. If the majority of people accept it, it becomes true. So he actually really disagrees with what Godin's saying about how lying doesn't get you anywhere. And so Harari even goes into this point. He says, like, look, Coca-Cola and Pepsi show you all these commercials with people running around playing frisbee and jogging on the beach and then drinking a Coke. He said, the reality is, if you drink Coke every day, you're going to get diabetes. You're going to gain weight. But they have successfully created this myth that is objectively false. that exists. So from that perspective, his argument is, no, you can be a liar and you can still be very successful. Whereas Godin was trying to say, no, you have to have some kernel of truth in your lying.
Yeah. So, why is it you think that some of these myths stick between these two, competing, voices of Godin and Harari? Why do you think? Because obviously not every myth sticks. Otherwise, we'd all be wildly successful marketers, and there would be a million myths in the world. But why do you think some stick and some don't? Why do we suspend the truth that we know about Coca-Cola and go along with this?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to a book that I read 40 years ago on direct mail marketing, and in that book they said there are 4 human emotions that will sell anything: fear, greed, vanity, and exclusivity. And those are all things that just pull at our DNA. There's something about it, especially when you get to see things like vanity. You want to believe that you're the smartest person in the room and that you're going to be, loved by millions and all that stuff. And so I think the myths that sort of have their foundational element in those sorts of things, safety, vanity, specialness, people really are willing to suspend disbelief to believe in them because they really want to.
Right. And do you think, and this is, I guess it goes against it goes with the title of your article, which is Do Marketers Have a Responsibility to Tell the Truth? Alternatively, is it our role to create those myths? I mean, we have to do something, right? So you say, are we to blame, or is it something we need to be doing, creating these myths? As long as they're not hurting anybody, are we allowed to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the article I talk about how lots of other professional organizations have standards by which they are held to. So if you are admitted to the bar, whether it's in England or the United States, the Bar Association requires, first of all, that you take classes on some level of ethics. And second of all, that if you do something that is considered to be unethical, that you can be disbarred and you will no longer have a license to practice law. And the same is true with medicine. The same is true with many areas. But in marketing, we don't have any of those standards. First of all, there's no requirement to take an ethics class.
No.
There's no organization that holds us accountable. And so we're basically left with the only thing that really sort of determines success as a marketer is basically how persuasive your myths are, which is usually determined by how much money you're making for your client. And that to me is a problem because you're basically not teaching marketers or telling them to even think about the ethical considerations of what they're doing. So to your question, are there good myths and bad myths? Absolutely, there are. But if you don't ever even think about that dichotomy, you will end up just doing whatever.
And I this is totally fascinating because it's not just myths that we create, do we, as marketers? We have all this as a group, as an industry. We have a massive budget, and we can use that, I think, as Seth Godin refers to as changing the culture, don't we? We change culture with marketing. So that's what makes it interesting. This debate about how far should we go? We obviously have a lot of power, right?
Ton of power. I mean, marketers are trained and incentivized to change people's minds. And so you can imagine if a really talented marketer who has no foundation in ethics or doesn't even think about it is just given a lot of money to work for a company that we could consider bad for society. I mean, whether it's selling drugs to children or creating selling military equipment to rogue, terrorists. I mean, there's lots of ways to imagine where you could sort of use marketing for bad.
Yeah. And in your article, you also talk about, do you think things have changed right now? I mean, because we talk about post-truth, and you refer to that in your article. Do you think we're giving up on truth and embracing these myths more than we used to, or what do you think?
I think we have been, as a world, we've been hit by all this new technology, the internet, social media, mobile phones, and it's just so easy now to spread a message and to to have competing narratives to what was traditionally sort of well-researched, fact-checked stories. And so I think we're kind of at a crossing point, turning point, where we're going to either figure out a way to really help people be critical thinkers and understand the difference between what I would consider a researched and evidence-based truth and an opinion that's masquerading as a truth, or we're going to get to the point where every point of view is weighted equally, and which means that there's no truth.
Right.
And I'm certainly in the camp of feeling like we need to create standards for how we evaluate truth. And I think there's a responsibility for everyone, whether it's in the marketing community, the internet community, to help make those standards reality.
Right. And where do we draw the line? I mean, you gave that example of Coca-Cola showing young people drinking the product, and then the truth is people with diabetes. But you also talked about fast food marketing, which is okay in moderation, right? And then you get these beautifully shot photos of plump burgers and the fries have just come out the fry and they're just so right. Is that okay? How far are we allowed to go as marketers in creating this myth, that the Burger King Whopper is actually 6 inches tall when really it's only 2?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously extremes. Like, if you as a marketer promote a nutraceutical that ends up causing thousands of people to die, then you're at the point where you're basically committing a murder. And then there's the other end of the extreme where you have sort of the Burger King commercial where they have 6 food stylists spending 10 hours creating the perfect burger in their commercial. And it doesn't look anything like that when you get in there. I mean, ultimately, I think the problem that we have is that we don't have any standards from anyone. We don't, the governments, and again, I can only speak to the U.S. government. The U.S. government is overwhelmed with, and doesn't have enough resources to actually prosecute situations where there's completely false advertising that's negatively impacting people. There's no real governing body of the industry. There's no consequences really, other than, I guess, in some cases, a civil lawsuit or something like that. So it's hard to blame marketers for doing things that are somewhat unethical if no one's telling them what's right or wrong, and there's no consequences.
It's the joyous part of capitalism, isn't it? It's it's part of our culture. Now I'm going to ask this question, and the listener might think I'm being a bit awkward with this, but you mentioned it in your article, so I think that's fine. But have you ever been involved in marketing something that you felt uncomfortable with, and what did you learn from that, and what lessons did that give you in your career afterwards?
Yeah, I have many times, unfortunately.
Many times.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this for 21 years, so I've got plenty of examples. But I mean, I think the biggest lesson I learned was that when I didn't ask enough questions about a product or service, in hindsight, you could look back and say, well, there were some warning signs that something wasn't right here, and I should have asked something. I mean, I'll give you an example. Early on, there was a company that offered. This was like back in the day of MySpace. So most of your listeners probably don't even know what MySpace is, but MySpace was one of the first social networks, and they had all these wallpapers that you could put on your social network, your page, to make you look sort of like cool. And this company offered a bunch of free downloads of wallpapers, so you could get like the cool bling for the back of your MySpace page. And I was like, okay, great, yeah, well, I'll help you get new subscribers to this. And what I didn't realize was that these guys were basically spyware. So once they got onto your computer, they would take over your search page, and they would give you search results from their search engine, and they would throw pop-ups on the page, and on and on and on. I never asked any questions. I was just like, okay, great, free wallpapers. It never occurred to me that if these guys were willing to pay $4 or $5 to get someone to sign up for free wallpapers, there's got to be some financial benefit to them. So that's just one example. I mean, I've got plenty of other examples. I mean, I was personally, not knowingly, involved in the 2008 recession with these mortgage bonds from the movie The Big Short. I was like buying all these mortgage leads, never asking why some people wanted some of these leads, and then after this whole mortgage industry imploded, I found out that our biggest customers were the people who were buying the lowest quality leads and then selling them to people on Wall Street and taking no responsibility for when someone defaulted on their mortgage, which almost all of them did.
Right. And so what you learned from that experience is now you ask more questions then and just figure out what the business does.
I try to, sort of ask that question of like, would I be comfortable if one of my sons was buying this product?
Nice.
As an agency, we've turned down numerous companies. I know we turned down a handgun company not too long ago that we just didn't feel like was something that we wanted to represent. And I think it's an important thing that people need to do.
Right. And I'm going to refer back to you talking about the Hippocratic Oath that medical professionals have of first do no harm, and lawyers have their rules of professional responsibility. And as you say, we've got no such standards. And it lies with advertising legislation and some association standards, but there isn't really anything. And what I want to ask you, and it's not in the article, is if you were to create the Hippocratic Oath of marketing, where would you start?
That's a good question. I think, something around striving for accuracy of representation and, sort of applying some sort of the categorical imperative, from I think it was Kant, right? Which is do unto others as you'd have done unto yourself. So just looking at what you're marketing and how you're marketing it and asking the question, like, again, is this something that if my 13-year-old son came home and said, Dad, I saw this great advertisement and I bought this product, would I be panicked, ambivalent, or relieved about that purchase? And if the answer is not, if its answer is panic, then there's been something wrong in marketing that needs to be corrected.
Yeah, and I like that idea of if a loved one, I mean, depending on the product, right, is if somebody I know bought this thing based on my marketing, how would I feel? I think that's a great start, isn't it, to a Hippocratic Oath of marketing? Yeah. If somebody I know bought it, what would I think?
Yeah, it's somewhere. I mean, it's somewhere. I mean, I think we do need standards, and and it doesn't seem like we're moving in that direction anytime fast. I mean, just the fact that people who go to get a marketing degree, there's no standard for taking an ethics class.
No. Yeah. And most of us, I mean, me included, are uneducated in marketing anyway. We started somewhere else and we've wound up in marketing. So even if there was a professional body and there was an ethics class that we had to take in our marketing degree to get into this profession, we don't need to do that. So it is a bit Wild West. And it's not a very positive note to leave on, but we're out of time. But I thought, I loved your article. I'm including a link to it in the show notes, and I think it's really thought provoking about the power we have as marketers, and that we need to control. And what do we do about, what we're selling and how we sell it? And it's in your newsletter called Inside the Double Bubble, which I'll also include a link to. And when people spin the dial on the interwebs, David, where are they going to find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm starting to sort of get my Twitter action going again. So it's
nice.
at Rodnitsky. Make sure you spell it right with a Z and not an S. But those are good places to find me. Nice. Well, thank you very much for coming back on the show. Enjoyed your article, and I look forward to having you back again. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate it. Cheers, David. Bye-bye. Thank you, David. Really enjoyed that conversation and the article that inspired it. You can find David's newsletter, Inside the Double Bubble, on LinkedIn, and I'll include a link to it, our chat about his book, Unfair Marketing, and all his links in the show notes. Right, it's that time of the week. It's Friday evening, time to wind down in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar with my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend. It's nice to be back in the bar again this week. Mm-hmm. Another fall day, and as we get prepared, I should say, for the upcoming content marketing world, which is this coming week.
Yeah, that was gonna be my first question. Are you ready? I mean, it must be very exciting coming out.
It is going to be. Okay. Yeah, it is very exciting to have some in-person people. I think if I had to say, are we ready? Yes, 100% ready. And I think the interesting thing is that it's going to be a really laid back. It's
nice.
The laid back edition. I think everybody's going to be sort of taking a breath, right? And using this week to reconnect, recharge, learn a little bit, have some fun in a safe way, and then of course we've got the virtual version as well. But I think laid back is sort of the operating word that I'm going in with, which is sort of just relaxed and not make it so intense and all of that. And so I think as such, we've got a lot of sessions, but fewer than in normal years, and we've got the whole place so that we can spread out and and take our time and all those kinds of things. And it's a much more laid back schedule this year. So I think it's going to be. I'm super excited to see old friends, make new friends, and really, just quite frankly, see real people in a real building for a while.
Yeah, I think you're going to be surrounded by some very excited people too. I think the laid backness might not be the consistent thing. I know a few people that listen to this show that I know that are very excited to be there. So I think there is going to be a lot of
There is a palpable energy. I will say that. I spoke at a conference a few weeks ago in Chicago, and I will tell you that the energy from the audience was, there was a lot of gratitude, right? There was a lot of excitement about being back in person, and feeling okay about it. And that was, it was important. And so they were, I think you're right. There is a lot of very excited people that will.
And how does an old pro, and I mean that in the nicest possible way, feel about being on stage after quite a break? I mean, how does that feel for you?
Weird, very. If I'm completely transparent and honest, it's weird.
Yeah.
Not because the audience made me feel weird, but just because it has been so long. That it just felt odd.
Right.
And good in a way. It was good to sort of get my sea legs under me, as it were. But more than anything else, it just felt a little weird, and especially at the end, right? Because there's that moment when you finish a talk and you're on stage and you walk off stage, and in some cases there's some people there to chat with you and ask questions and stuff that they didn't want to ask while you were talking and all of that. And in this case, everybody's, sort of filing out to do their thing and go, take a break and all that. I was the last speaker of that particular morning session, and everybody sort of just got up and walked out, and I was just sort of standing there and just realized that, it wasn't because of me. It was because they all felt a little awkward too about, well, how close do you get? Is it right? Is it, we're all sort of figuring out this social human interaction thing again. There's some awkward interactions that you have with humans in this case. And so that was a little weird too.
Yeah. I mean, just a silly little thing. I met my best mate down the pub the other night, and went out for a meal. And for the first time, instead of elbow bumping, we shook hands. It'd been a while, and I was like, are we doing this? You know what I mean? There's little things are weird. But so anyway, best of luck next week with Content Marketing World, which is obviously in Cleveland. And people can join virtually as well, can they?
Yeah, it's going to be great.
People can still sign up, I imagine, if I do a little bit of selling.
I think so. For the virtual event, it's probably a little late at this point to make it to Cleveland, but indeed, plenty of time to sign up for the virtual event and get the live stream and all those kinds of things.
Very nice. So back to this evening.
Yes, as we look at the bar, we have a wonderful drink to celebrate all of this.
Nice. That'll calm your nerves when you speak.
Well, as I sit here at the bar, and I feel like. I feel like we're in. It's a bit of one of those moody days, right? Where it's windy outside, and you can feel a little bit of the breeze coming through the door, and you can hear that whistling of the wind through things. Can you hear that? I can hear that.
Yes, I
Hear
can
that. And
hear
anyway,
it.
what
You
we
do know
have
that I
tonight.
don't have a huge sound library that I
Yes.
just select these things.
What we have this evening is a very simple drink, but unfortunately, there are ingredients that are a little hard to sort of source.
Right.
And so, and it's one of those things where it's a specialty drink. So buying a full bottle of this stuff is sometimes like, really, do I want to buy a full bottle of this? So this may be better to order in a bar.
Yes.
The first, it's a martini. So
Ooh.
as you can see, it's going to have very, very, very simple ingredients, but again, maybe more difficult to find. And it's a caramel martini. And again, sort of celebrating the fall, the winter, the coming of chill in the air. And it starts, I don't know if you've ever had it, but there's a caramel vodka. And it's caramel infused vodka. It's absolutely spectacular. I've just had it recently and it's really wonderful. And it's 2 ounces of this plus an ounce of butterscotch schnapps, which I know sounds nasty, but it's really not. It's not. It's 2 parts, basically 2 parts caramel vodka, 1 part butterscotch schnapps, and then maybe just a little bit of cider of your favorite choice, your favorite flavor of cider. And you mix all that together. No ice in this. You're going to mix it up into a mixer, and then pour it in as you would to a very cold martini glass, and you have your caramel martini, and it's absolutely spectacular.
Quite the sweet drinks for fall for you, Mr. Rose.
Oh, indeed. I have a huge sweet tooth. Yes, it's This
you might hear that I'm.
This is how we roll in the wintertime. Yeah.
Well, I'm sneaking in some ice into a glass because I don't have those ingredients, and who would expect it? They're rare ingredients, aren't they? So
they are. They're a little hard to source. I do admit it's not the kind of thing that you're going to find at your local supermarket or.
So I am going to delve very deeply into my desktop bar, and I'm going to reach for something that is sometimes in a martini. Some gin.
Ah, yes, indeed. The proper way to make a martini in my mind.
Yes, indeed. Now, at this point, I should be saying I'm going to have a martini and put something else into it. But what I'm going to go with, as is my want, is a little tonic. I think.
Oh, nice.
Into this strange martini that I'm making this week.
Well, it's really not even a martini at this point. It's a vodka tonic. Or a gin and tonic, rather.
Gin and tonic. Trying to get my bottle of tonic open. It's not playing ball. So let me just get. There we go. Genuinely couldn't get my bottle of tonic opener, and there we go. That's just some regular Indian tonic water this week. Let me take a sip of that. Oh, that's delicious, Robert, and not very sweet, but quite warming.
Certainly not as sweet as your caramel martini. Yeah, that is correct.
That is nice. Yes, I do have the occasional espresso martini for my sins. It's the closest I get to something like that. But that sounds delicious. And what did you call it? A caramel martini, or did you give it a fancy name?
I called it a caramel martini. Yes, I mean, you probably could give it a fancy name, but caramel martini seems fancy enough, I'd suspect.
Yes, and I suspect next week is when you're going to be drinking all the orange drinks, isn't it?
We'll find out. I mean, there will be lots of orange. There is no doubt about it. I tend to stay away from the orange colored drinks, personally. We'll see.
I remember drinking a lot of Dark and Stormy with Kathy McKnight when she was with a different company that had orange in their logo. Your chums, Kathy. That was quite an evening. Anyway, so moving on, we're not at Content Marketing World, but we are in the fall and we are drinking these sweet drinks. Where would we be drinking these, Mr. Rose?
We would go. So there is a place. Some of the best bars I've ever been in my life
Right.
are in Copenhagen. And
Cool.
and I love that city so much. And it's one that I haven't been to, obviously, since the pandemic began.
Yep.
Miss it terribly.
Yes.
And I, to this day, there, and because there's, and maybe it's just the bars that I've been to, you know, and that I've been taken to, I should say, in
Yes.
Copenhagen, but they are
finest
always so cozy, right?
Yeah.
They're the kind, you know, you sort of have this coziness in an English pub, right?
Yeah.
Where it's dark and, you know, and it smells a little like beer, and it's, you know, you've got dartboards and you've got, you know, some characters running around, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then you've got the American bars, which tend to be a little lighter, you know, they all smell like a burger. And, you know, and, you know, fried foods and, you know, and they have, you know, there's sports being played on TV and, you know, all that kind of thing. In Copenhagen, when you walk into a bar, the only thing that's happening is a little bit of music in the bar, right? I mean, it's just there. And there's always comfy chairs and there's always, you know, friendly discussion, and it's always just a little bit of music. It's not, you know, it's just, I really like them. And anyway, so I think if you're having this kind of fancy caramel martini and the wind is blowing and it's a little chilly and it's, you know, you've got your heavy wool sheep's sweater on, you know, it seems like Copenhagen is the place to be.
Yeah, I love it. I love. Oh my God, I can't believe it. It's because I think one of the last big trips that I did before the pandemic, I did a little tour of the Nordics with a software vendor that helping them speaking, and it was just wonderful. You know, like I got to go to Oslo, Copenhagen, all of the Nordic cities whose names escape me.
Did you get up to Gothenburg?
No.
Yeah. So
no, did I? Yeah. No. So we did. Yeah, and we did a tour over 3 different weeks. It was just, and they've got the whole range. I mean, they do have the cozy bars, absolutely, in Stockholm, but they've got some really classy cocktail bars as well. And I'm sure you will find all of the range of cocktails that you bring to this bar in Copenhagen too. Yeah, beautiful.
Yes. I mean, someday I want to do like a tour where I start in the middle of Sweden somewhere and come down through, you know, Copenhagen and go through the rest of Denmark and come down and spend time in, you know, into northern Germany and, you know, Hamburg and, you know, which I've never been to. I've never been to Hamburg, and move into the, you know, either go into the Netherlands and end up in Amsterdam somewhere, or continue south through Germany and get into Switzerland or something. I just want to do this sort of, you know, the north to south sort of trip.
Yeah. And I recommend doing that. I think my first billable day as a consultant, away from British shores, because my first billable day as a consultant was at the Guinness brewery when it was in North London before they moved everything back to Dublin, and which was fantastic, obviously. And then, as I've drunk Guinness since I was 17, and I think my first billable foreign trip was in Hamburg. So
I miss a great Guinness, I have to say. You know, because you're not going to get that here in the U.S. certainly,
not so much.
But yes.
Yes. All right. Well, we better get on to the conversation of the week.
Indeed.
I'm hoping you've got time. So we are in the wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen, and we've obviously exhausted our conversation about content marketing, world, and cocktails, and we're moving into marketing. What are we chatting about this week, Robert?
You know what we're going to chat about this week? We're going to chat about epic failure. And I don't mean just middle of the road failure. I mean epic failure. And what I mean by that is, you know, so have you had the conversation with colleagues around outputs and outcomes?
Yes.
You know, and I think we've even talked about a little bit.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, outputs and and it can often be like this chicken and egg situation, right? Where it's like, you know, do we focus on outputs to get to outcomes, or do we focus on outcomes that design the outputs and all those things? And in content marketing, content strategy, really marketing, if you want to take it up that. It's almost, I mean, this is one of the biggest, fails that we see, right? Which is marketing departments focusing on outputs. How many blog posts do we produce? How many white papers? How many ebooks? How many videos, et cetera, rather than the outcomes. And that's conventional wisdom, right? Conventional wisdom says, hey, we should focus on the outcome and then design the outputs accordingly.
Yes.
And that's interesting. But what really interests me, and I was actually having a conversation with a friend about this lately, on this outputs and outcomes and fail idea, is what happens to us as people, as humans, when we epically fail at the outcome part. And I don't mean the content didn't produce enough quota of leads, or we didn't get the SEO bump, or we got a bad comment on the blog or something. I mean, trip and crack your skull type failures in marketing. I mean, Last Airbender movie kind of level of failure. Richard Nixon thinking a tape recorder in his office is a good idea kind of failure. So this is the kind of failure that I was talking about with my friend, and what they told me is that they had recently put together this thought leadership campaign, and they were trying to drive awareness of the company's ideas and what they stood for and all the things that and they were focused on that outcome, and it had failed miserably. I mean, spectacularly, without going into a lot of detail about the exact things nor throwing them under the bus. Let's just say that memes of their fail were going around in their industry, right? Where, just how big of a fail it was. So, I mean, the campaign turned into a bit of a joke.
Yeah.
And they had definitely not created the outcomes that they had desired. And, my friend was feeling defeated, lost. And that's a common reaction, right? When we go into that kind of epic failure, sometimes we get angry. Sometimes we blame others. Sometimes we try and disassociate ourselves from whatever's coming next. Sometimes there are so many different reactions that we have, but the key and sort of the underlying thread of it all is we withdraw, right? We withdraw into our own, and we start asking and questioning what we're going to do next. And the problem is that we start asking, how can we even know what the outcomes should be when we have failed so miserably to create that?
Yeah.
And, this is the disempowering failure that something like that can happen, where, we can't even imagine what good outcomes will be anymore because we doubt ourselves so much.
Yeah.
And so in that face of that, I think it's interesting because to me, the argument shifts from focusing on outcomes to focusing on outputs. Because what I find to be really helpful when that has happened to me in the past, and when I've seen it in the past, and I've seen this work, is basically saying, when you face that, to say, how do you get out of that mentality, is to say, now what? What do I do? Do something. You've got to do something, right?
Yeah.
You've got to, maybe it's inconsequential. Make a phone call, write a note. Write something and share it. Do whatever action calls you to do something, you've got to do that. Just try it. Yeah. And that now what may feel a little bit like, oh, we're just trying to grasp onto some kind of hope for something, but it's an output, right? And it's taking a step, and it's taking a step forward. And then you take that step forward, and then you do it again, and you say, now what? And then you say, now what? And you keep taking those steps forward. And what happens is, and there's a great book that has the same title, is as you take those output steps forward, eventually a path appears. And as a path starts to appear, you can then go, great, what's the next outcome? And we can start redesigning our outputs accordingly. So, focusing on outcomes are great, but when we are facing disempowering failure and epic failure, focusing on outputs can be the way out of it.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's good advice for anybody who's had a little bit of a knockback. I once was working with a colleague because, if you write something or you get into something, you get into flow, don't you? And then you're distracted from whatever that emotional thing is that you're going through, and it can be really great. Plus, I think as marketers, well, as a lot of execution marketers anyway, we get a lot of reassurance from getting something done, right?
Right.
So I think that's really good advice. Is you would then get something done, and then and so you'd get some dopamine out of that, or whatever it is you get from achieving things. But also, if you can get yourself into flow and start writing or creating, then that's the best drug, isn't it?
It's.
I don't know a lot about drugs, but
it's taking it's taking in action, right? It's actually, because one of the sort of human emotions that happens after you have you go through something like that is you immediately start questioning everything you do, right? And it's such a it's such a familiar place for so many of us. I mean, we thankfully very few of us have frequently certainly maintain a job the kind of epic fails that we're talking about here, right? Where you're just you're just disempowered from feeling like anything you do is good. And so thankfully those tend to come rarely, but when they do, it can be very paralyzing. And the only way out of it, I have found, is to focus on doing something and not worrying too much about what the outcome's going to be. And doing something that makes you feel you're getting back up on the bike and you're taking a pedal, and it may just be a ride around the driveway, and it may just be a ride around the block, or it may be a ride, and ultimately putting one step in front of the other just sort of helps you get to a place where you can start to see again.
I love that analogy of the bike ride around the yard. That's excellent. So yes, that's really profound. I'm like stunned. But maybe I shouldn't drink so much gin when we're talking. But that's fantastic. I don't know, but no, I love that. I'm just going to say, when people want to feel these profound feelings, where are they going to read about these with you, Robert?
Well, occasionally we put a few of these little thoughts up on our wonderful little blog at contentadvisory.net. That's the center of our little content universe these days.
Yes. And when we spin the dial on the interwebs and we're looking for you, where will we find you?
You'll find me on all of the little social channels, except for Clubhouse, which has now made page 4 of my iPhone now. So,
I heard that.
I don't bother with it anymore. But nonetheless, Twitter and LinkedIn are still very popular places to be.
Nice. Fantastic. Now, at this point, I pretty much know that I would be very fortunate to have you in the bar next week, because you are going to be in the bar at Content Marketing World, I should imagine. So I've just killed my audience for next week, because nobody will bother listening to me. But so I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks, Robert, here in the bar.
That's right.
And good luck with Content Marketing World. I think you're going to smash it. And have a great week.
Excellent.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you, Robert. As you heard, Robert will be hosting Content Marketing World next week in Cleveland. And I know some of you will be lucky enough to be there. So please raise a gin and tonic from me if you see him in the bar. So that's a wrap on episode 81 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott, and thanks again to Jeff, David, and Robert. I really appreciate their time, sharing their insight with us. So please take a look at their work and share it. You can find all their links in the podcast show notes and at rockstarcmo.fm, where you can also find all our previous episodes. But most of all, thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track, and jiving along with us. So, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? What do you think? We are Rockstar CMO on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can leave a rating or review in your favorite podcatcher, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, I'll be at the Next Web event in Amsterdam. Robert is at Content Marketing World, so after 81 consecutive episodes, I may take a week off, or maybe drop in a shorter episode, but we'll definitely be back in full swing in 2 weeks. Until then, have a great week, and I hope you'll again join us here next time at Rockstar CMO
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.